Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. How many times have you heard people blame DNA for something bad that's happened in their health? But what if I told you a lot of it has to do with your lifestyle? Nutrition, exercise, and sleep are the major factors that affect our health. Today's topic is women's health and healthy aging. And guess what? You do have control over it. I'm joined by Dr. Vivien Brown. She's a family physician and assistant professor, Department of Family and Community Medicine, University of Toronto. She's also the author of the New Women's Guide to Healthy Aging. Dr. Brown is on the board of the Women's Brain Health Initiative since its creation in 2012. Welcome to Empowered, Dr. Brown. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So let's just dive right in. What are the top 5 things that you need to live a long, healthy life?
Well, when we look at some of the options that we have, we really divide it up between modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. A non-modifiable risk factor is just getting older. A non-modifiable risk factor is your genetics. You can't change that. What we can change are the modifiable risk factors, things like what we choose in our life. Are we going to exercise? Are we going to eat a healthy diet? Are we going to smoke or not smoke? That has a big impact. How do we deal with stress? How do we see ourselves in terms of aging? Do we see ourselves as healthy, active, and engaged? Or do we see ourselves as isolated, stressed, and at home? And so I think when you make these decisions earlier in your life, in terms of socialization, friends, exercise, healthy choices, it sets you up for healthy aging as you get older.
So is longevity genetic then?
Part of it is, absolutely. And so if you have parents that have lived a long time, that's great, and that's great for you. But we also know that part of it is a matter of choice and a matter of control and how you make your decisions. And so we're always fighting against our genetics if our genetics are negative, and family history is important. And family history may help a doctor decide whether to go with a certain therapy or not, investigate something early or not. One of the best examples is with colon cancer. If you have a family history, we're going to do something much earlier than if you don't. But in general, lifestyle has a huge impact. And we know that lifestyle impacts your risk of cancer. It impacts your risk of different infections. And your choices, for example, to get immunized may prevent serious disease for you in your health going old as you get older.
Let's switch to the brain. I want to talk about top ways to contribute to a healthy brain.
Well, I am absolutely biased because I am part of the Women's Brain Health Initiative. And unfortunately, what we know is that 70% of new Alzheimer's cases are in women. We know that women mostly are the caregivers, and we know that dementia is something that everybody is really worried about. So what can you do about that now? Well, what you can do is you can make good choices. You can have a healthy diet with a lot of antioxidants, because what's good for your heart is generally good for your brain. You can be socially connected. And we saw during COVID when people were isolated, it really did affect their health and their immune system. You can do regular exercise. When you exercise, your brain gets more blood flow, and more blood flow is better for your brain. It's bringing oxygen and nutrients to your brain. And there's a great slide that I like to show when I'm giving a lecture that shows part of the hippocampus, which is part of your brain, before exercise and after exercise. And the amount of blood flow is significantly different. You know, we talk in women's brain health about the pillars of brain health, and sleep and stress are 2 important pillars as well. If someone is chronically sleep deprived, they're not getting time for their brain to detoxify in the night when they should be sleeping. And if someone is chronically stressed, it affects your telomeres. And when it affects your telomeres, that also affects an enzyme called telomerase. And we know that doesn't protect your cells, and you age more quickly. There's a doctor named Elizabeth Blackburn who in 2008 got the Nobel Prize when she looked at telomeres in healthy people and in healthy people who were very chronically stressed. And chronic stress affected their physical aging, not just their emotional situation.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to talk about tips for getting a good night's sleep and a lot more of women's health. So please don't go away. We've got a gem here with Dr. Vivien Brown. We will be right back after this message. Thanks a lot. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing healthy aging. And yes, ladies, we do have control. Dr. Brown, before we went to break, we were talking about sleep. We talk about sleep on this show a lot. What are some tips for getting a good night's sleep?
Well, the first thing that I think it's really important to know is that sleep is essential. And it's not just the hours that you stay in bed, it's getting restful sleep so that you wake up feeling refreshed. This is important for heart health because your blood pressure drops when you're sleeping, and that's a normal nocturnal dip. It's important for brain health because your brain detoxifies during the night when you're sleeping. And we know even in children that growth hormone, for example, goes up at night. They're going to grow better if they've had a good night's sleep. So sleep is important throughout our lives, and it's something we need to pay attention to. One of the things that I've learned, and I've actually learned some of it from Adriana Huffington, who is this remarkable woman who ran the Huffington Post. She wrote a book on sleep after she passed out on her desk, fell, fractured her face when she was so overtired that she'd just been working nonstop. And she went from being proud of not needing sleep to understanding that it's really important and that everybody needs sleep. So, what are some of the tips? Number one, get into a good habit. And what does that mean? It means getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time. Even if you're on the weekend and you could sleep in a little longer, better to get up at a regular time and go to sleep at a regular time. It helps your body adjust. And with babies, we get into a routine. We give them a bath, we give them a bottle, we put them to bed, maybe we read a story. But when you do that night after night, that gets into a routine for that baby. And it's the same for us as adults. So whether it's shutting the TV, shutting your laptop, taking a bath, getting into bed and starting to relax, you need to get into that routine to wind down. There's no point being in bed with your laptop on your abdomen, trying to get that last few minutes of work and then say, oh my God, it's already 11:30. I better go to sleep, closing the laptop and expecting your brain to shut off. Doesn't work like that. So number one tip is get into a good habit, morning and night, getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, and having time to wind down. Number two is shut off all the electronics in your room. You don't need things buzzing and having light, and that blue light is stimulating. It's telling your brain to wake up instead of go to sleep. And we have that on alarm clocks. We have that when we plug in our phone. We have that on laptops. You want your room to be cool and dark and quiet. I think it's really important that most of the sleep experts say your room should be good for two things: sleeping and sex, not TV, not reading a very engrossing mystery novel where you're all wound up and then you say, oh no, I've got to go to bed. You really need that quiet, dark room that really is set aside for you to allow yourself the luxury of settling down. I used to talk about sleep when Game of Thrones was on TV, and I would say to people, don't watch Game of Thrones if you're trying to go to sleep because you'll be up half the night. And that was me because I stayed up and watched it, and then I would be walking around the house. The reality is if you're overstimulated, you're not going to sleep well. So getting into that good habit, not having caffeine, not having exercise at night, as much as we want you to exercise, don't do it after dinner or late at night because your endorphins are up and your body is stimulated. Stop drinking caffeine by noon. So don't have Diet Coke or coffee or anything that is a stimulant because some people are much more sensitive than others. And I think it's also really important to stop drinking after about 7 o'clock because women, particularly after menopause, have to get up to go to the bathroom. It disturbs your sleep. And if you're having a lot of liquids, if you're having that cup of tea before you go to bed, you're going to be up 2 hours later to go to the bathroom. So it's all a matter of getting into good habits and starting to maintain those good habits. If that works for you, great. And that works for the majority of people. But if it doesn't, one of the things that doctors suggest is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It really is teaching you how to relax, how to get your body to relax, and starting to get into a better habit. Much better than taking across-the-counter medications that may be sedating, but actually you get used to them very quickly, and much better than going on medication unless it's really warranted, unless you've had that serious discussion with your physician. So CBT-I, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is well recommended. You can look it up online. You can follow the instructions. It really does work for a lot of people.
This is really important, this information that you just shared with us, because typically you talk to somebody and they say, oh, yeah, well, you're stressed. You should just sleep, sleep, get into a pattern or whatever. But you've got so many different tips here. And a lot of us are up all night long because our brain is constantly twirling. So please don't go away. We'll be right back with more healthy aging. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. I'm joined by Dr. Vivien Brown, family physician and assistant professor, Department of Family and Community Medicine, University of Toronto. And she's also the author of the New Women's Guide to Healthy Aging. So here we are. Let's talk about immunization. What diseases can we prevent by getting immunized?
Well, Elizabeth, this is such an important topic. I appreciate you bringing it up because the way I talk about immunization to my patients is I combine the term immunization with independence. And what does that mean? It means when you're immunized and when you prevent certain potentially catastrophic diseases as we get older, you maintain your independence because a disease like a severe pneumonia, severe respiratory diseases like RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus, influenza. These are the diseases that can affect you so badly that you may not be able to breathe on your own, even if you survive the disease. And what we find is as we age, you're more likely to end up being hospitalized. So people over 65 are much more likely to be hospitalized with pneumonia, with RSV, with influenza, with COVID than younger people. What's also interesting about immunization is all the different data sets from the US, from the UK, from Canada have ended up looking at the risk of age-related disease and the risk if you have underlying diseases. So for example, if you're 65 and healthy, you should get a pneumonia shot. But if you're 50 and you've got diabetes and maybe COPD, and maybe you're on medication for your heart, you should be getting that same pneumonia shot at age 50. And if you have underlying immune compromising diseases like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, you actually should be thinking about getting these shots somewhere between 18 and 49. So the age group changes depending on your underlying risk. And one of the reasons that's so important is because when you get a disease, and I'll use pneumonia as the example, it increases your risk of a heart attack, it increases your risk of a stroke, it increases your risk of exacerbating asthma or COPD. And the older you are, the more likely those comorbidities that maybe were stable and that you were doing fine in the community become unstable, and you end up needing more and more assistance, even a caregiver, even changing the situation where you may not be able to go home and live independently. So when you're talking to your doctor and you're looking at, oh, do I really need a flu shot? It's like, yes, you don't want to get influenza. You don't want to be on a ventilator. You don't want to end up not being able to go home and live independently. And the various shots depend on age and depend on risk.
Wow,
I think,
that's a lot. That's a lot to undertake. So let's just take it to the next level. So who in my family should get what vaccines to prevent the diseases?
yeah. Well, there's all the childhood vaccines that we do a good job with in Canada. We prevent polio, we prevent pertussis, which is whooping cough. We prevent a number of diseases in infants and children. Then in adolescence, we generally are just giving tetanus and pertussis boosters every 10 years, but we also are giving HPV vaccine. HPV is human papillomavirus, and that prevents cervical cancer, throat cancer, anal cancer, vulvar and vaginal cancers. In Canada, we offer that to every boy and girl in the school system, paid for by public health, because we want to decrease these cancers. And in other countries, they already have done that. Our uptake has not been great. During COVID, the numbers fell off. And so we're not doing as well as we should. Unfortunately, cervical cancer is on the rise in Canada. And in Scotland, last year, they did not have a single case because their rate of immunization is so much higher than ours. So we want to look at cancer preventing vaccines, particularly in adolescents and young people. Then as we get older, it depends on our underlying disease. So people with diabetes, people with asthma need different shots at a different age than someone who, say, for example, just turns 50 and says, okay, what do I need? And when you're 50, it's a good time to see your doctor and review what shots you've had, what shots you need, and where you should be looking. We also are immunizing women in pregnancy. We're immunizing women for influenza, for COVID, for pertussis, which is whooping cough. It's going to protect their baby. And depending on the situation, we're immunizing pregnant women for RSV so their baby is protected. There also is an immunization to give babies if it's available. Right now, it is not available. So we're trying to immunize pregnant women so that their babies are protected. So every age group has a different scenario to follow, but the bottom line is we want to prevent these preventable diseases because it makes a huge difference on your health, on your ability to exercise, on your breathing, on your independence. So think of immunization and independence going together.
Thank you so much. Please don't go away. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today, we're talking about healthy aging. Dr. Brown, what are the top ways to reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke?
Well, that's a great question because we've just finished February, which is Heart Health Month. And I think it's really important that we pay attention. You know, women are underdiagnosed for heart disease. When they get diagnosed, they're usually farther along than their male companions. And we know that women are less likely to get interventional surgery for heart disease. And so I think it's really important that we talk about prevention. When we're looking at heart disease in women, number one, across the board, stop smoking. And unfortunately, women do smoke. Women sometimes smoke when they go out with their friends. They smoke when they are having a drink. And even a small amount, even 1 to 2 cigarettes a day, doubles your risk of heart disease. So you need to stop smoking. No question, there's no minimum amount. Nothing is good. I think it's really important that you manage your cholesterol because what we know is if your blood is too oily, it lines the arteries and it increases your risk of a heart attack. And when I see a cholesterol number in an average woman, everybody always says, oh, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to exercise. I don't want to start a medication. And that may be fine. And that individual person may be able to do that. But for the most part, people are in their habits. People are not going to make those major changes. And diet only accounts for about 30% of your cholesterol. The other 70% is what you've inherited. And so if you have high levels of LDL, low density lipoprotein, that is the bad stuff that's going to line your arteries, and you may need to be on a medication. And if we choose between you and me, you and your doctor, if you choose to go on a medication, then you have to take it. Because one of the problems is people take it for a week or two and then say, I don't really like this, I'm not going to take it. And the bottom line is we know that by lowering your cholesterol significantly, very low cholesterol has a very low risk of a heart attack. We also know that if your blood pressure is too high, it means your heart is working too hard, you're not getting good blood flow to your brain, and that's going to be a problem in the long run. So what do patients say? They say, I get nervous coming into the office. My blood pressure is always better when I do it at home. Well, if you're nervous in the office and maybe you're nervous driving in traffic and maybe you're nervous at the bank and maybe you're nervous in other situations, then your blood pressure may be high a good portion of the time. So we need to pay attention to that. It may be worth it to do a 24-hour monitor and see what your blood pressure is like over 24 hours. But again, if we need to treat your blood pressure to get you within a normal range, we're protecting your heart, we're protecting your brain, and you need to take your medication. And we know by Ontario data that often people stop medication, they don't renew their prescriptions on time, they run out for a couple of weeks, and we need your blood pressure to be normal. So blood pressure, blood cholesterol really needs to be good. What about diet and exercise? No question, this is really important. A healthy diet is good for your heart and it's good for your brain. You don't have to be perfect. They've done some studies where even if you follow a healthy diet 80% of the time, you get benefit. And nobody's perfect, and I'm going to admit that I'm not perfect. But realistically, about 80% of the time, I am eating a low-fat, healthy diet. And I think that that's something we all need to strive for. And finally, we need to exercise on a regular basis, not be a weekend warrior. We don't want you to go out and really overdo it on Saturday and Sunday, trying to make up for what you didn't do Monday to Friday. We need you to be active every day. The Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada says most days of the week, that's 4 out of 7, you need to be exercising. And that exercising needs to be intense enough so you're a little bit short of breath and a little bit sweaty. If you're walking your dog or if you're window shopping, that doesn't count. It may be fun and it may be social, but it's not cardiac fitness. So go pick something where you're a little bit sweaty and a little bit short of breath, and then you're getting good cardiac fitness. So exercise, diet, quitting smoking, watching cholesterol, watching your blood pressure, taking the medication if it's been advised. And if you do have diabetes, being sure that that diabetes is under as good control as possible makes a real difference for those small blood vessels, which are the blood vessels that supply the heart, the eyes, the kidneys, the feet, etc.
Dr. Brown, I'm going to admit I'm not perfect either. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure to be here. And I think realistically, when people start reading the book, my patients say they hear my voice, and hopefully that's helpful to everybody.
Thank you. I will quote Dr. Brown from her book. We need to make our own health a priority and make lifestyle adjustments and ensure that we are functioning at our very best right now. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Bye for now.